Hi, guys. Thanks for joining. My name is Gina Bruno. I'm one of the community managers for ESO. Thank you for coming. This is the Creating a Trial panel. We have 3 of our ESO developers here with us, and they're just going to be going through sort of the process of what it is to create a trial, which is our 12-player content. If you have any questions, we just ask that you wait until the end of the panel to ask them, but we will have time for Q&A if you have anything. So to kick things off, we have Mike Finnegan, our dungeon lead, and he is going to get right into it.
Hi, how are you? I'm Mike Finnegan, dungeon lead with Elder Scrolls Online. I know, I'm repeating Gina. I've a little bit of background about myself. By the way, he's going to heckle me all.
I'll be good. I'll be good.
Right. So I've been in the video game industry a little over 15 years, and with ZOS for 4 years. I have the distinction of being probably the only person in the company that has personally touched every single dungeon, trial, and arena.
Cleaned up my messes.
Cleaned up his messes, which he cleaned up Jeremy's messes,
and
I cleaned up Jeremy. Yeah, it's this cycle. And if I off Jeremy and Rich, I get to be creative director. So that's the way that process is going to work. So in short, you can blame me for any problems that you would have. So does everybody know what a trial is? Yes? Yes? Well, I'll explain it anyways. Trial is 12-player content. It's akin to raids in other games. The focus is on action rather than not as heavily on story, because we don't want 12 people to wait around for one guy, every single person to talk to a guy.
Well, I mean, telling a story with 12 people is really hard, right? You know, like you said, you don't want to wait for, Jeremy to sit there and read everything.
Right.
No, he does.
He does.
And so, with the trial, we try to tell stories through the setting, through the action that's going on. And it's still a huge part of telling a story and, in the trials, but we do it a little bit different way. It's more visual and less text heavy.
Very good. It was almost like it was prepared. So we also have complex mechanics. We also have complex mechanics that we introduce in the trials. Stuff that really requires a group of players to synergize together and to work together. Our previous trials included Hellraw, Citadel, Sanctum Ophidia, and Aetherian Archive, and you also have a picture of Maelstrom Arena, which is part of what my team is responsible for. So when we went into Maw of Lorcage, we were to take a look at what you guys really taught us about trials. And you taught us that you really like working together as 12 players, not necessarily being split up like in Hellraw. You really like gauging your success via the leaderboards, at least some of you did. And you really liked pushing the limits of mechanics so that you had to think about the encounters and the fights that you were going to go through. So all of this stuff, which is great, helped us with developing Maw of Lorcage. So the goals of Maw of Lorcage, first and foremost, were to develop new and interesting complex mechanics, to push you guys and to challenge you guys. Our previous trials were pretty good, but we also wanted to extend the complex boss mechanics that we had developed into more of the base pop, so that when you're fighting bannermen and ogres and stuff like that, it's also a thinking game that you think. It's not the stuff you have to chew through in order to get to the boss.
It's not just stack and burn. It's not the tank and spank. Right. We wanted you to be on your toes the whole time and not just when the boss hits. So.
Yeah, and another aspect that we really wanted to hit on with Maw of Lorcage is something we call player engagement. And that is getting as many players as possible that want to play this content into this content. And we do that in several ways. Via interesting new concepts and normal and a veteran mode and scaling the trial and stuff. So when we create challenging mechanics, the very first thing that we ask, as well as the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, every single time, the question is, how does this communicate to the players? How are the players going to be able to take a look at what we're doing, what's happening to them, and figure out what it is that we're doing? We rely heavily on our art team for that, and I think Jared was going to.
Yeah. So I mean, we do a lot of iteration first of all. So there's a lot of play testing and a lot of iteration. But the player messaging is really helped out by the effects department. It's the effects that tell the player really what's happening and give clues as to what they need to do next. And for this particular trial, it is
Space Kitties.
Khajiit themed, and
Lawrence is gonna kill you.
Space Kitties.
Space Kitties.
Dubstep Space Kitties.
Now Brad's gonna kill you too.
Yeah, wow. Well, and so we drew space.
Yeah, look at that.
Put the kitties in.
Put the kitties in it.
It is solar, themed on the solar bodies. All the graphics in here, all the effects graphics, are oriented around the lunar cycles of the moons, and that's the visual theme that we went for, really. But to the earlier point, it's test, test, test.
Yeah, and if you can see some of this stuff, these are color studies and concepts that we went over to really sell. As players are hit by different things, you see the guy here that gets progressively glowing brighter and stuff like that. Those color studies and stuff inform the effects artists when they come in to create a unifying theme for the effects, so that you go in here and instead of this guy shooting fire and this guy shooting poison and it all looking kind of like a jumbled mess that everybody's doing their own thing, all of the abilities and all of the everything will match together and be a unifying color, so it looks like it's all from the same place. Next goal that we, once we got kind of the idea down behind how we wanted to convey the complex mechanics, was player engagement. And as I mentioned, player engagement is getting as many people as possible into the trial to play as many people that can play the trial into the trial to play.
This is the accessibility factor.
This is accessibility factor. That's exactly right. So when we went into this trial, we noticed that when we did Maelstrom Arena and DSA even before that,
Dragon Star Arena?
Dragon Star Arena. I'm sorry, I'll use abbreviations all the time. If you look at Dragon Star Arena and Maelstrom Arena, we really appreciate the normal mode and the veteran mode that allowed more players. There's the veteran mode for the players that really want to challenge themselves and optimize their builds and get together and say, these are the strategies we're going to use and we want to do it in the best time, and it's leaderboard gated. So there's that for those. And then there's the normal players and the players that want to really go in and have a more casual experience and enjoy the story and the content and kind of challenge themselves, but not be bleeding edge, beat up and kicked in the balls, I believe is what somebody said.
That might have been me, sorry.
You might have said that, yes. So while there is a place in our game for kicking people in the balls, the normal version, for those who just joined, welcome. The normal version is, for those that just, the normal version is not for that. But we don't want people to just go, oh, this was a cakewalk, this was story mode. So those are kind of the broad strokes of what we wanted to do with normal and veteran mode. And then we get into, this is an actual map that we during development that we do to lay out kind of how our encounters and how our fight spaces. This is Malvlarkosh. So the initial design is a lot like Rich mentioned earlier, where you have a ZDD and you have a CDD. But then once we get into the nuts and bolts, we do rough maps and then finalized maps, and then we plan out where the encounters are going to go. Development on Dungeons, Trials, and Arenas is much more encounter-based. So whereas a typical zone team will have several quest designers and they'll have some encounter designers, my team mainly consists of encounter and boss designers, but we're also going to have what we call a content designer who is going to place some of the base pop as well as implement the quest. And then we also have a fiction writer to kind of make our words pretty. So we're much more focused on action and play space and how this goes through. So a lot of our designs are very informed by what we've done previously. Pacing is a very important part for us. As this map kind of shows. So much like the much like encounter designs, we still want to try to tell a story, and this is where you get a good shot of the space kitties and the armor sets that are available in Malvlarkosh. We still want to try to tell a story, and as Rich talked about earlier, telling a story with 12 players is really hard. So we can't use the story techniques that really the Overland group uses. because we have to tell a story by the action of going from place to place and fighting this stuff. So most of our story is told, and as you progress the story as a player, the theater moments or the story showing moments will happen, but you don't necessarily have to go and see there. In Mauve Lorcage, the Twilight Cantors, which are a group of singing Khajiit monks, will go through and they cleanse these tablets in order to stop the Dramathra magic. Well, as you're progressing, if you're going for a great leaderboard time or you're going for, you just want to get through this and go through the action, you can do that. Behind you, she's still going to go and cleanse the tablets and do all that stuff. So if you want to hang out and watch and listen, she actually sings in Tagra, so, which is actually another side moment. That was pretty awesome from our fiction writer to actually take the Khajiit language and create an entire song with it, complete with inflections and pronunciation guides for how, because we had to get a voice actor to sing that. So, and it's not like, oh, I'm just going to sing it in German. No, it's a completely different, it's a non-existent language, so other than in the Elder Scrolls universe. So that was pretty cool. And another aspect that we wanted to do with here, after we get the story down and stuff, is we really wanted to push new and challenging mechanics to players. The mechanics, like I said before, were great on bosses in the previous trials and even arenas and dungeons, but we thought you guys could handle more. So we also wanted to do that for the base pop. So from start to finish, we wanted to create a sense of progression through the trial. So the encounters that you fight at the very beginning are easier than the encounters that you would fight at the very end. So that is, if you fight 3 Bannermen at the start and you kind of get an idea of what they do, then you're fighting 6 Bannermen at the end. And then the Bannerman makeup is going to be different at various points. And then at some points you have wave encounters. You could, on the previous map, you can see that there's wave encounters here, and you're going to have to fight progressively more and more monsters and then go through. Not only with the encounters, we also wanted to do that with bosses, so that boss 1 is easier than boss 3. Boss 1 is Zajasa the Forgotten. Obviously.
What?
Forgotten.
Oh.
Not unheard, forgotten.
What?
We wanted to make sure that his mechanics, while you could easily discern, he's still going to feel easier than the second boss, who's going to feel, which is the twins, Vishai and Skinrai, who's going to feel easier than the third boss, which is Rakat. So we do that in various ways. We try to, when we talked about the visuals, selling that via effects, we wanted to, so you can discern what's going on, but not necessarily survive it.
But it also just fits the theme of the whole story. It's not just a mechanic. But I wanted to actually touch on, go back to the storytelling points that you were making. I think there's a really cool visual storytelling element that we used here, which is we have these really cool carved friezes that occur throughout the dungeon that are there that sort of give you some more information. They're in the bottom right, the concept for those. They give you a little bit of more story and background to the mythology of what's happening, but you don't have to look at them. But it is there. So we're not beating you over the head with all this lore, but it is present. So I think that's a cool thing that we're doing with these.
And that's pretty cool. And that happens kind of organically when we go to sit down and do some of these trials, and we say, well, here's the story and here's stuff, and we sit in there with Jared and Mike Phillips and our artists, and we'll sit down and we'll say, this is the kind of story we want to convey. And then a lot of times they'll kick in and be like, well, we could do this. We can add these little freezes, and we can do this, and we can add this stuff. And we're like, yeah, just do that then. That's great. We can do that. So it eventually gets added into the game, and then it tells that story. It's exactly what I sound like. That's exactly what I sound like. Exactly. Yeah. Almost like Scooby-Doo. Almost like Scooby-Doo. Like, yikes, Scoob. So, like I said, we really wanted to push the mechanics and really drive the progression of the trial throughout. Now we bring to the final step of the process. Once we've kind of gotten all that down, we've gotten the encounters in and stuff, and the final step of the process, or the final 2 steps, are QA and playtest server. Our QA group is fantastic. They've been with us for a long time, and they've QA'd all of the trials, plus dungeons and arenas. So they've gotten pretty good at what they do. We rely on them very heavily. We have an embedded group within the dungeon group, and then we also have we have resources outside, QA resources from other teams that we can pull. They're really, really good with the game, and we can pull them into. We have this room called the focus test room, which is like 12 computers, and I pull them in there, and then like for 3 weeks, 3 hours a day, they just play these things over and over again, and I'm behind them like, what did you think of this? What did you think of that?
The focus test room also has that really creepy two-way.
It does have a creepy two-way mirror.
We can actually watch people, and they don't know we're watching.
It was originally supposed to be that. Was this like, yeah, it was like police lineup situation where we just had like them in there playing, and then we'd turn the light on, and they would see our face and like, no, do it again, and then turn the light off. And, so there is that aspect. That's mainly for our enjoyment, though. It's just creep them out. So our QA group gets in there, like I said, it's 3 weeks, 3 hours a day. They test with all kinds of different group makeups and group setups. That's part of the thing. We have one guy that Jay is one of our testers on our embedded group, and he kind of organizes all these people and says, even if we're coming in there, and he says, if you're going to be a range DPS, you got to be this. These are your classes. These are abilities you're going to use. This is all this stuff. And they're like, okay. And then but at the same time, we test with a little bit, and then we swap them out. So another part of the QA process is making sure that the visuals that we had talked about earlier are conveyed to people. So when we first get our QA group in there, we don't just say, okay, well, here's the design for everything, and this is how everything is built, and this is what we want everything to look like and stuff. No, we actually send them in there like players would, and we just say, hey, this is how you get there. Figure it out. And so it's a lot of growing pains initially but they're used to it, but it's a lot of growing pains initially of like, I don't know what's going on, and then they have to figure it out, and they have to discern it. And that part of that for us is making sure that the mechanics that we're putting in front of players, people can figure out, that people can see and say, oh, okay, yeah. And our QA group is really, really good about, they know that this is what their job is, and they know that they have to figure this stuff out. And they give us the benefit of the doubt a lot of times, where some aspects don't give us the benefit of the doubt. They go into it expecting us to know what we're doing, which is refreshing, because a lot of people don't go into this expecting like we know what we're doing. So, looking at you, directors. So they come in, and we make sure that they discern the mechanics, and then afterwards we kind of tell them, okay, here's the designs, and here's how we expect these fights to go, and stuff like that. And then we get to watch them go through knowing the mechanics. There's an inherent danger with that, in that we don't want to give them too many mechanics too early and let them know what's going on too early, because at that point they would think less outside of the box on how to break things, and think more along the lines of, well, this is how it's designed, so I'm going to do it like this. So we tried it. There's that parity in that level there, that we want to make sure that they can figure out the mechanics, and then once they do figure out the mechanics, they can go through the fights and everything works right.
Yeah, we don't always want them to test the right way. What we envision is the right way. We want them to go in there and see, what happens when you have 12 Sorks.
Yeah.
Various different builds, play it, what happens? Can you do it?
12 Sorks with 2 pets each. That's
chaos.
Great stuff.
Absolute
that's great
chaos.
Stuff.
So that's the whole part of the QA process is, figure it out, make sure, the base stuff works, and then go batshit crazy. Try things that, you the players do,
Yeah. Part of that aspect, or part of that to that point well, that was actually more for the public test. But so to touch on what I've mainly been talking about is veteran testing. When we first get in there with veteran testing, we make sure that when they're testing with, best gear, certain champion point levels. They're testing with monster mask, maelstrom weapons,
full-on pots,
food, player crafted pots and food, because those are the best. So we're making sure they're going in there like there at the top end. Then when we do normal testing, because we can't have our group go in there with normal testing and be in full gear with monster masks and maelstrom weapons. So we usually dial it back quite a bit. And to the point that we even will sometimes, so we have various skill levels of people in the company, and sometimes we will grab people that know how to play the game but probably aren't the best at it. And those are people we utilize in order to test the normal modes as well, so that we can make sure that people can go through here, people that play more casually or whatever, can go through and still have a fun experience. And they're usually in blue crafted gear, and they don't have monster masks and or maelstrom weapons or anything like that. And the final step of the process is the public test server. And where Rich talked earlier about his favorite step is implementation, me and my team, our favorite step is public test server before it goes live. Public test server is where my team gets in the most trouble, I think.
Are you actually working?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. So
surfing the internet.
When we get on the public test server, me and my entire team, we sit in this little group of cubicles, and so we sit over there and we have multiple Twitch streams. And they're just up, and we're just watching all these different people play our content and stuff. So we're actively, we're as big a cheerleaders as anybody else. So we're actively watching you guys and like, oh, wait, to see this mechanic come up and stuff. To the point where I said we get in trouble because people go to Rich and like, they're just sitting over there watching Twitch all day. What are they doing? Aren't they doing anything? So
they're working.
We're working by watching Twitch or streams or whatever it is we're doing. We're also watching the forums too. So we watch Twitch and to the point that we like the very first kill of Zajasa, the first boss, we were there. We were all sitting here watching. We're all at work and we're watching around one computer, just like, oh, they're gonna do it, because it's great to see that from 40% health, and then they get them down to 30%.
Click moment where they understand the mechanic.
They understand the mechanic, awesome. and when sometimes we get to this point where they're like, "Well, he's at 21%. I know what happens when he's going to happen at 20%." And then we're like, "Let's see," and then the 20% hits, or they kill one boss too early, and then they're like, "Oh," and then they wiped, and we're like, "Yeah, we knew that was going to happen." But
I will admit, it is really satisfying to see players die to mechanics, right? Like I guess
mechanics we intend them to die to.
I guess it's a perverse pleasure, but it's really cool to watch them bang their heads on the wall and over and over and over again, and then suddenly there's that click moment, like I touched on earlier.
It's great to see that sense of progression. It's great to see players from the start not knowing anything about it, and then slowly get mechanics. And it's great because we'll hear in Twitch, and especially if they have their guild chat in Twitch and stuff like this, and I'll hear somebody offhand comment say, well, what if this is true? And it's great because it could be an offhand comment and nobody could heard him, but I heard him and I'm like, that's the actual mechanic. Let's see if anybody else hears it.
Who's listening?
Nope. Yep. Nobody heard it. So so we just sit there and we're like, all right. And we try to do some things to help out with this. We had like death recaps and stuff like that, so that unfortunately we noticed that a lot of people don't look at death recaps. So because it's great when we'll see and somebody will die to something, they're like, I don't know why I died. And I'm like, it's right there. It's right there. I can see it. You can read it right there. It tells you why you died. You died because you're bad. Not really. That's not really what the death recap says. This says something right. Yeah. Why you died. So that is probably the most fun aspect we have is being able to watch people on PTS play through the content and really get it and work their way through it. And then once it goes live, we also continues to watch because I don't think anybody beat Rakat on live. But another aspect of PTS is we also find somebody's
new
playing
mechanics.
Some jazz out there. Did you hear that?
That's good.
All right.
New mechanics on PTS.
New mechanics that come from players playing. We would like to say that we develop all these mechanics. We develop most of them, and we like to say we develop all the mechanics. But sometimes some things happen in game that'll be like a bug. An example of this is in Rakat. At the end phase, he summons these little orbs that will shoot a beam into him and it'll increase his armor. So you have to kill him before he gets so many orbs that he's just negating all of the damage you do. And that's kind of like an enrage mechanic where you just like, oh no, we got to beat him, burn him down and stuff. Well, one group of players figured out that if you run into those orbs right when they spawn, they despawn. And they don't buff him. And we originally saw that and we're like, that's a bug. We got to fix that. And we started to go through the process of fixes. And then the boss designer, Shane, is a guy on my team, he came back and he said, you know what? I kind of like that. I kind of like the idea that, this is just something that happens and it's a new mechanic that works, and it still takes coordination for you to be able to do that kind of thing. So at that point we said, all right, well, let's run with it. So we went to the art team and we said, hey, this was a bug before, but now we want to support that. And they gave us new kinds of effects and stuff so that when you run into those orbs, they now pop and they blow up. So it's part of the aspect of the fight and the mechanic. Yeah?
So you would say that there are no bugs in the game. It's all just
Exactly. It's really how we categorize it. It's either an unintended feature
Happy little accident.
or a happy
That's
accident.
good, I like that.
Well, there are bugs. I'm not gonna say there are bugs that we find and we fix. As with any software. Yeah. So there are bugs that we find and we fix and stuff like that. It's just sometimes we'll take a look at some of the bugs that would come up and we would say, oh, you know what? That we can make that an intended feature. We can do it because we like that style of gameplay and how that kind of came about organically.
Yep.
So that's pretty much how to develop a trial in a nutshell. If you guys have any questions, me, Rich, or Jerry can ask those or answer those. We can ask your questions for you. Me, Rich, or Jerry
I'll ask
can answer those
myself
questions.
real easy questions.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Sure.
One easy, one hard.
Sure.
Sure.
One, what's your thought on the current status of taunts for tanks? Because they're kind of lacking.
Okay.
In what way?
Like thoughts on making more of them, not seeing enough tanks in general to warrant making more taunts, or
So I think one of the things that we want to make sure of with tanking in general is that it's not I go and grab every monster, pull them in there, and then just keep them all on me. Mm-hmm. We want them to kind of bounce around and cause this chaos so that everybody's kind of paying attention. So that's why we've gotten this question a lot. How come there's no AOE taunts? Right. That's why we want the tank to have to work really hard in order to keep everything on there. The goal of the tank is to find the big baddie, go get that guy under control, and then start working on peeling the other things off the other players.
Yeah, the goal from the tanking from the outset of Elder Scrolls Online in Dungeons and in Trials, and I was an integral part of and kind of designing that role, was we want the tank to grab the thing that's going to kill people the most, but not everything. So, if there's a group of 6 monsters and stuff like that, and you're like, well, that one's going to kill everybody, so I got to take that one. And that's kind of the design. So that's why you don't see as many AOE tanks, because and if there is a situation where somebody could go and essentially tank everything, we would take a look at the encounter and say, okay, well, that's not hitting the mark we want. We would rather have it be more organic, get people moving around and stuff like that.
We spent a great deal of time in Mav Lorcash to get away from that everybody group up and AOE and blow them down.
That's actually a major aspect. One of the goals that we were looking at with Mav Lorcash was to generate more movement. The strategy in Hellraw, AA, and Sanctum, Sanctum not as much, was to stack and burn, was to just go up, gather up all the mobs and AoE them all down. And you see that from the base pop to the bosses in Mav Lorcash. You have a giant silencing circle that's dropped on the ground. You have area effect spells that are fired off a monster. So it doesn't behoove you to stand in a group, in a tight knit.
I mean, you can. But
you can.
You pay for it.
It can be problematic. What's interesting though is when we talk about PTS is we did see that the first time. It's like, oh, we know how to handle this, and the first thing, and they go stack and they all die. So we were like, well, that's So then getting that into mindset of like, oh, we can't do that. Okay, that makes sense and stuff. So so what was your second question? What was the hard one?
Well, from the trial perspective, is it just like any? I play D&D, so it's all game development as far as maps and trials and plans for lore. So this whole thing is basically how I run weekly encounters perspective, I see in a lot of trials and in a lot of just the lore, there's always an effect or there's an ability that an NPC can do. Like, most of the mages can drop like permanent shields, teleport all over the place. But players, I feel like, are very unable, they're unable to always mimic these effects. So I, as a player, see that and say, wow, that's an awesome ability, but even when I play mage and maybe Skyrim, like I'm an archmage, these abilities are still missing to me. I'm still not able to do them. So from that angle, what are your thoughts on having permanent abilities that NPCs can do, but players can't? Can we ever...
I think the key, for me in that regard is we also have to worry about balance, players to players, how that interacts. And I think the more, we get to kind of cheat with NPCs, right? Where, we want to kill we want to kill you guys, right? Like, as terrible as that sounds, when we're in those trials and in those dungeons.
The takeaway from this panel is Rich wants to kill. Just saying. That's the takeaway here.
We want to, we want you guys to think outside the box. And so that's why we kind of do that. And with the players, we have to be a little bit more careful with that.
And to go to that point, we try to avoid, whenever possible, we try to avoid if a monster is using ability packages that, for instance, a player could use. So if you see a Templar and then you see him do this weird Templar streak or something crazy like that or something, and you're like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
We try to, whenever possible, to avoid that. So if you see the Dramatha dropping a giant silencing circle and doing these massive AoEs and stuff like that, well, he's a Dramathra, so he's obviously not a class I can play. So we actively try to avoid mimicking player abilities and then giving it something that's like, well, this is totally something I can't do. So yeah, it's definitely something we consider, and we try to avoid that. We'll go from the back because his hand has been up for an hour.
With saying that, are you guys planning on making more classes?
Making more classes?
I am
Anytime
personally not making any more classes.
But you never made them.
But I never made any of them.
Or is that just not really influenced?
I mean, at some point, it could happen. But right now, we're focused on, fixing bugs, balancing the game, and adding new content.
And adding Dark Brotherhood, yeah.
And also, please make sure your questions are geared towards trials and dungeons.
And in the form of a question. I'm just kidding.
So regarding trials,
Yes.
it wouldn't just be with them, but as well as like big group dungeons. So as a
Yes.
solo player, I have a lot of difficulty with stuff like that. I haven't gotten a chance to try a trial, but with the...
You should try Maw of Lorcash.
I'm looking forward to it very much, but as a solo player...
Normal
I'm
mode
afraid.
for it. Just saying.
So am I going to have a hard time as a solo player in that? Because I often go into the big dungeons and be like, wow, I wish I had 3 other people, because I just get killed instantly and give up. And I feel like
that's
I'm
what
missing a
Group
big part of the
Finder's
game.
for. We've got a tool.
For dungeons, yes.
For dungeons, yeah.
Yes. And we can say that... Yeah.
Can you actually say it?
I can say that a looking for trial system is something that we are very interested in doing.
I'd like to see that.
Yes, I would too. It's very much something that we want to do. When this goes to the accessibility part that I was talking about, is getting as many players that want to play this content in to play this content. Normal mode is great. Scaling is great. A looking for trial thing would be a natural extension of that, and it's definitely something we would want to do.
This looks like really, really interesting. I really look
It's fantastic. It's great. Oh, all right.
Okay, I've got one back here.
Okay.
Has Vet Mob been completed yet?
Yes, by 3 guilds.
One of them on console.
One of them on console.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice. Sweet. Thank you.
All right, so specifically about Maw, the 2 gauntlet style things?
Yes.
Bosses? I'm trying to figure out how to word this gently. What's coming to
don't-
mind is,
How awesome are they? And
Why did you
answer the
add
question is, they're very awesome.
I've run it with my guildies
Yeah.
a few times, and it just kind of feels like a slog getting through all of those waves of enemies.
So we'll go back to the slide where you can kind of see the encounter
Right.
map.
And I don't want
here.
to say, it's terrible, get rid of it.
No, it's not, because it's not terrible gameplay. What it is in this regard, we wanted to have what we call loot moments in here, and there's 5 loot moments. Those are moments that you're going to generate loot from the various loot tables that we have in here. So in this regard, we wanted to have several that weren't necessarily tied to a boss. Wave events are a good way for us to do that, and they escalate. So you start the wave event, and then it progressively gets more and more difficult.
yeah.
But at the end, at least there's a payoff for that. So
Well-fitted set.
that's the goal. What was that?
Well-fitted set for a stat I don't use.
Okay.
We're fixing,
but I mean,
we're fixing traits.
We're fixing
The Dark
traits.
Brotherhood.
Yes, yes. So, so in order to have a loot moment, we don't necessarily always have to have a boss before a loot moment, and the two wave encounters are a good example of that. That being said, we have heard feedback specifically about the wave events, and we'll take a look at that when we do future content and
Right.
stuff. Yep.
Thanks.
I'm going to ask a question that came from the forums.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I got it. Thank you. It's from Paulington. He was asking.
That guy.
That guy, yeah.
I know that guy.
What is your ultimate plan for trials in ESO? And kind of as a follow-up, would you like all trials to have a difficulty scaler where you can input CP level or that of your group and it would scale to that difficulty?
My ultimate goal for trials is to get, again, this is, and I hate to keep saying the same thing over again, but to get as many players in there as possible to play it. I want 100% of the people to go in and experience the trials, because it's content that we spend a lot of time on. We put a lot of hard work into, and it's fun. It's really, really fun stuff. So that's my goal for trials. Now, if we talk about difficulty scalers, I would love to have multiple scales of difficulty so somebody can go in, kind of like akin if you think of like Diablo's torment levels or something like that. I would love to do that kind of thing. Currently, our systems don't necessarily support that, so we want to. So having the normal and the veteran version of those trials is how we can start to get that process in, and I think it creates two balance points that are really, really good for players right now.
When it comes to trials and you're making something that you know people are going to play in a big group over and over and over,
Yeah.
how does that change how deep you go into the story and like things that people are going to blow past because they're trying to do it fast? Like how's that different?
We try to keep the story to the showing moments. Keep it on the side, but still a major part of it. Like Mike talked a little bit about the the Khajiit priestesses that are kind of going through, and they do their thing and they tell their stories as you're kind of blowing through. So if you want to take the time to listen to it and to really look around and experience it, you can. But if you don't, you can just go off and do your thing, and it's still there.
And not only that, it's also the. So if you're on a group that wants to go through and just you're not caring about the story, and you're not taking a look at that, so you're going through, you're like, we're gonna get the best leaderboard time, we're gonna go through and we're gonna burn through this stuff, and maybe you've done that for 3 months, and you're like, that's awesome, and then you see somebody on the forums who said, hey man, have you seen the story in Maw of Lorcage? And then maybe someone's like, I've run that for 3 months and I didn't even know that stuff was there. And maybe you can go back and do that and say, oh, you know what, let me play through and see that stuff. I want the story to be there for when you're ready to see the story, not necessarily be the driving factor for you to get through that stuff. So that's pretty much the goal for trials and dungeons as well. We good?
So I know it was mentioned earlier that Sanctum is going to be scaling with Dark Brotherhood.
Yes it is.
With that in mind, are you going to be changing the mechanics to start avoiding the stack and burn like you did with Maw?
So Sanctum already had some advantages to that. We had already learned a lot when we developed Sanctum for Hellra and AA to avoid the stack and burn. If you look at mainly the boss fights, had some mechanics that were thrown in, the Quake for the Manacora, and the Serpent's craziness of the totems and everything like that goes on, and everybody has to go grab an orb and stuff like that. So we generate movement a lot in those fights. We did go through and rebalance the Bannerman abilities so that they aren't so. What it is and what didn't generate kind of movements and stack and burn there was those just weren't damaging enough. So when the overcharger put overcharge on you and it did electricity damage all around you, that just didn't do enough damage. So we upped it. So we said, okay, now eat that if you're in a group. So pretty much. The war priests that run around and they have the little healing thing, that now snares you and does damage to you. So you're not going to want to just stand in that. Oh, it's okay, you'll get through it. So we took a look at a lot of those mechanics. We also added a brand new Bannerman that is going to throw some new wrinkles into it with poison and stuff. And the spreading poison that the trolls throw on you, that does a lot more damage now too. So we took a look at a lot of those mechanics that we had designed to prevent stack and burn that weren't necessarily hitting it and just upped it. So yes, in short.
All right. This is about dungeon quests, so I don't know if it's dungeons or quests.
I do the quest too. Well, our team does the quest.
Okay, so you mentioned before being able to go through the story at your own pace.
Yes.
But if you're doing the dungeon quests, there are situations where the NPC will not have the talk to me marker over their head until they've finished what they're doing.
Yes.
So I'm thinking of that Darkshade Cavern specifically,
Yes.
where it takes like 30 seconds for
Yes.
the Dunmer girl to finish getting up, so that you can progress the stage of the quest. And
She's a little slow.
Yeah, and by that
Trying to give her some perk.
by that time, if I've been pugging it,
Yeah.
my teammates are like 300 feet ahead
Right.
of me, and they're like, "Why are you back there?" And I'm like, "I'm waiting for her to shut up."
Yes.
Is there any plans to maybe be able to skip that in the future?
So specifically with those kind of mechanics, we take a look, and that all informs the future decisions we make when we talk about dungeons. And
Right, I've
trials
seen
and
less
stuff
of that.
like Yeah. So as we get time, we've been going back and trying to retro some of those dungeons to play a little bit smarter. Like originally, you had situations, especially in the early dungeons, where you didn't have to get the quest, and you could do the dungeon where you were on the quest or not, and the theater didn't play, and then. I can't tell you the amount of back-end problems that causes when some people are on the quest and some people aren't on the quest and somebody disappears. So what we did is we went back and we kind of retrofitted a lot of that stuff so that the theater is going to always carry you through the dungeon no matter what. That being said, your point is very good in that we don't want to create a situation where it's like, okay, now I got to wait for this guy to talk for a half hour. So yes, in those cases, as we get reports of those issues, we will definitely take a look at it and try to make sure to alleviate them.
Okay, so would I submit a support ticket and just be like, this is my feedback?
Yeah. Or a forum post. I read the forums all the time.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Speaking of forums.
Hey, look at that segue. It's like I knew that was coming.
This one is from, I lost my place, sorry. Lolo01. What are the reasons behind the loot system, specifically in Maw of Lorcage?
Okay, so Maw of Lorcage's loot system is, we had this thing so that we could give out loot but not flood the market with the loot. So what that is you have this, at the start, the very first time you do the trial, whether a normal or veteran, the very first time you do the trial for the week, you get 100% loot drop on all the bosses and all the loot moments. Afterwards, it goes to a standard percentage drop chance. The issues that we've seen and the feedback that we've heard is that's not very well communicated and not very well liked. So we have taken, and the first step of this is with Sanctum Ophidia in Dark Brotherhood expansion DLC, is we're putting in something so that every time you kill a boss, you get a set piece. It may not be one of the new set pieces we come up with that's really cool and creative and stuff like that. It could be one of the older set pieces that's where we've retro added it. But every single time you kill a boss, every single time you will get a set piece. So we're taking a look at that, and we hope to be able to
You're right, go on.
we hope to be able to bring that. We hope to be able to bring that to Maw of Lorcage as well, so that it alleviates some of those complaints or some of those issues that people talk about with, I shouldn't kill the boss and not get any loot.
Any other questions?
During QA, were there any bosses that were just complete brick walls for the teams?
Every single boss. That's part of the process, honestly, what we do when we start is we make it way too hard. So we go in and we say, all right, let's go fight this. And it's like, every other ability is one-shotting, and the tank's like, I could take 3 of these hits and stuff like that. And then it's a paring down thing of saying, okay, well, that's a little bit too high, and that's a little bit too much, and this does a little bit too much damage. So it's very much an iterative process where we take a look at the brick walls that are hitting him and just alleviate this. And then that's also kind of the deciphering mechanic. So boss 2 in particular, the twins in Maw of Lorcage, was a huge problem for our or it was a huge challenge for our QA department to be able to go in and actually fight and kill those 2 bosses, because they would constantly wipe and stuff like that. But as a design team, we have to take a look and say, okay, are they failing this because the mechanics are too tough, or are they failing this because they're not quite as organized as they need to be? And a lot of that process is us deciphering that. And then like I said, I mentioned Jay earlier, we lean heavily on him and say, are you guys just being bad? And he's like, yeah, we're just being bad. Okay, all right. So, on our development servers, we have just commands that they can repair.
We have a dev command.
We have a dev command that
to
repairs.
repair all our.
Yes, to the point that on live, I've typed in that command and it does not work. So, so we get them to repair it. But yes, to answer your question, every boss is a brick wall when they first get to it, and that's part of the process, is them learning and saying, okay, and then us saying, where's the brick wall, and is this a mechanics, or is this they just need to get good. So.
So you basically have a professional rating team?
We have people that we will lean on more than others. So we don't have 12 people on the Dungeon QA team, although I wish we did, but we don't. So what it is we go and we pull some of the QA group that plays the game quite a bit. The gameplay QA group, we rely on them heavily because, they're testing the abilities all the time. So we pull them in and grab them. Pretty much a lot of the content groups where people have played a lot and stuff like that, we grab them and pull them in. So while we don't have a set like these are the raiders, we have a hit list of people who say, okay, we're going to do trial testing, so you guys have to come in and stuff like that. So yeah, kinda.
Well, I think to do rating is, I guess that's it.
It's fun. It's fun.
This one's kind of a mix, again, from the forums. Kind of a mix between what's going on in Dark Brotherhood and what's going on with Trials. They were asking how Dungeons and Trials are going to be scaled with the removal of veteran ranks.
It's going to feel the same as the way it works now. It's just going to work towards champion points instead of levels.
So anything that would show as VR 16 before will show as I think champion 160, which will be the max or something like that right now, and the gear will scale up to champion 160. And it'll still scale to the group leader like it does now. So if you go in and your group leader is champion 100, then the monsters will be champion 100, and they'll only drop champion 100 gear. So that's how it's going to work. It's the total you have.
That's my question. To expand on that a little bit, is it 160 points in each tree?
No.
Or just 100?
Total.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Whoop. Okay.
Yep.
What was your favorite mechanic to watch players die trying to figure out?
The twins was pretty fun. Not gonna lie, that was fun to watch.
The explosion hug, which is when one person has a dark buff and one person has a light buff, and they just get too close, and then they boom and they become a puddle of goo. Actually, and that's funny because in QA testing, that was what we called it. Was like we would get to a point and they would be in the fight and they're like, we have too many people dead. All right, everybody just die. Give everybody a hug. And then you would just see this group of people just all run to each other and just boom, and then it all blow up. So that's why we call it kind of like the hug. They're like, oh, they got a hug to wipe. So yeah, that's probably one of our favorite mechanics to kind of watch. It's easy to discern. You know exactly what's going on, and you could tell when somebody's getting too close. They're like, ooh, it's not going to end well. So. Right in front of you. Right in front of him. There you go.
Hey, just a general question. I'm only like level 22 in the game. I've been playing for a year, but on and off. But I'm curious. I was very surprised at how well the gameplay of the offline games translated into an online game. And I'm sort of curious, were there any specific challenges you had to deal with when designing multiplayer content, as in trials and raids, dungeons, whatever, that, unexpected stuff compared to what you've seen in other MMOs?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one is trying to tell a story when there's 11 other people running around doing things is really hard. Sometimes you get the, jackasses like this guy, running around naked or dancing or doing stupid stuff when you're just trying to enjoy, the quest. And so
that's just in the office.
so that's a really hard part, is telling a story in that setting.
And also, I mean, we do this. So as players get together, and when more players get together in a group, a lot in our game, because of all the different aspects we have to our game. When you talk about advanced mechanics like animation canceling and stuff like that, the order of magnitude that players get more powerful is huge. I mean, they just their power grows so much when you get 4 players together, and then when you get 12 players together, it's orders of magnitude greater. So coming up with mechanics and then coming up with difficult challenges for that level of power. We probably missed the mark just a little bit with Hellra and AA, and if you could see in how quick those completions were, because we didn't have the wealth of data that we have now. But we've learned so much from Hellra and AA and even Sanctum Ophidia that that's why you see when Maul comes out and it becomes a challenge and it's 45 minutes or it's an hour for people to complete instead of 20 minutes or something like that.
5 minutes.
Yeah, I was just curious, as you mentioned, that there's no AoE taunt in the game.
Right.
And that's not typical of an MMO. So
and that was part of the aspect that when we were first doing dungeons, way back in the day, that was one of those things that we actively wanted to avoid, was to say that's not how we
more independent characters.
Right.
It's reliance on having a mob magnet.
Yeah. We didn't want that aspect. So our DPSs in our game and our healer class, they can take a couple hits. We didn't want every monster to be able to one-shot everybody else. We wanted it to be the tank's role in this is not to grab everything, it's just to grab the most dangerous thing.
I like it. It makes it very different from other MMOs.
Yep.
So I'd actually like to give the aesthetic
perspective
on that question, which is one of the big differences is the scale of action.
Yeah.
Right. So in the single-player games, it's a much tighter, smaller scale of action. We have to create spaces that accommodate the larger number of players, and then we get bigger bosses and more spread out battles. So there's actually a lot more going on, and where it becomes a little bit problematic because it's more difficult to get the feeling of crawling through a tight, low ceiling dungeon, creepy dungeon, because you have to build the space that accommodates a larger scale of action. So. That's something that we play with, too. So.
I have one. Sorry. Do you want to go ahead?
No, you.
Okay. This is from Native Joe on the forums, asking, will trial gear be more relevant outside of the trials that you get them from? And if so, what are the plans for that?
So I think this is probably in relation to the new Slayer buff that we added for Maw of Lurkaj. So the new sets that drop in Maw of Lurkaj drop a Slayer buff, which gives you extra damage, 5%. I think it's 5% extra damage against boss monsters. That was something. There's a lot of sets in the game that will do a lot of things for your damage at a base level. So what we wanted to do with Maw of Lurkaj's loot is to create a situation where we want these to be very PvE centric. We didn't want to create a situation where everybody feels they have to go PvE in order to PvP or vice versa. So we wanted these to be a good buff and a good mechanic, but also to provide something for you to do specifically in PvE. We're still gathering feedback on that and how effective that is and how players are receiving it. And if we think it does pretty well, we'll definitely do that in the future.
All right, so we've got 5 minutes left, so we could probably take a couple more questions.
All right.
Yep.
So this is kind of specific to tanking, but have you considered / are in the process of coming up with a in-game system that teaches players how to use their role? Because it's depressing how many times someone has queued as tank because they thought that the sword and shield icon was cool, and they're not taunting anything, and I ask them why, and their response is, "What's a taunt?"
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the challenge of pretty much any. I don't have anything specific to
Right. Like even like during that introductory Undaunted quest, which basically tells you, oh, go to the first dungeon for your zone. Congratulations, you are now Undaunted.
Yeah.
I think there's things we can do to better call out which abilities are taunts.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's definitely
Or just the
something.
concept of like you pull aggro on the big bad guys,
Yep.
healer, big shirt. Well,
I think we can improve there for sure.
right. Cool. Great.
The normal modes will help. As more people get into trials through normal modes, they'll learn that more easily.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue. So we're going to wrap up here. If you didn't get a chance to pick up a Dark Brotherhood poster, we have some in the back and can certainly give you one as you exit. Or alternatively, if you'd like to stay, we have another panel or activity coming up with Lawrence where you're going to try and stump him, our own Lawrence.
You don't want to miss this. This is going to be glorious.
So thank you all for coming.